Hey, eighth grade. So in this lesson today, we're going to continue learning about author's perspective, and it's day two of that. And we are also continuing to focus on author's purpose. A quick reminder about author's purpose. When we talk about author's purpose, we are focusing on three primary purposes: either to persuade, to inform, or to entertain. I'm going to briefly review all three of them. If you are looking to persuade, it means you are trying to convince the reader to believe something, influence the reader in any type of way. If you are informing, it means you are simply giving the reader information. And if you are, you're educating the reader on a subject if you're informing them, right? If you're informing, you're giving them information. And lastly, to entertain, uh, if the purpose is to entertain, that you will notice that the author uses imagery of the five senses to paint uh, a vivid picture for the reader to visualize. And usually, when the purpose is to entertain, the author wants to make something particularly interesting or to make you laugh. Um, it's pretty self-explanatory. It will be entertaining for you. All right. Now, when we talk about perspective, we think of what a person thinks or feels about something, how a person feels or thinks about a particular topic, subject, or person, whatever it is he or she is writing about, right? And usually we can get a sense of what the author's perspective of a topic is or anything that the author is talking about by paying close attention to specific words and phrases that are used in the text. And we're gonna see how exactly we can do that when we take a look at this text on the local sustainable meal from the same book that we've been reading, The Omnivore's Dilemma. We're gonna evaluate the author's perspective in that. So for this lesson, you should have watched this video, how to identify author's purpose and perspective. This is a review, so it's optional. If you've already watched it, you don't need to watch it again. If you have not watched it yet, then you will need to watch it. And this is the text that you will need for today's lesson, for the classwork and exit ticket, and we're gonna read that together. And before we get to reading this text aloud, I'm gonna play this short little video that explains what local sustainable farming is. It's important for you to know and have an idea of what local sustainable farming is for the purposes of today's lesson. So I'm going to play the video.
One of my favorite things to do is go to the farmer's market on Sunday mornings.
When you're getting food from a local producer, when you're getting it from within 100 miles, when you're getting it after it's been picked freshly that morning, it's going to be so much more flavorful.
I think the greatest joy I get from farming is when people tell me how incredible that tomato is, how incredible that potato is. It's about having a relationship and taking responsibility for your food. You know the person who's growing your food.
In the farmers market, there's so much opportunity for us to really acknowledge and honor the people who grow good, clean, whole foods and bring them to us.
I know when I show up at the farmers market that the food is local, that it's good for me, and that my dollar is going basically back to the farmer who grew the food.
We are helping to strengthen the local economy, supporting our neighbors. It's up to us to ensure that farmers can continue to do the work that they do and provide us with the fresh, healthy local food that we all deserve.
All right, so this should have given you an idea of what local sustainable farming is. And you can clearly see the difference between this and industrialized farming based on what we've read before. We know that with local sustainable farming, the fruits and vegetables that you get from the farmer's market are are local. They're grown locally, usually no more than 100 miles away. So you know that when you get their fruits, they are very, very fresh, grown very recently. And on top of that, when we think of sustainable, right, you can trust that the farmers are taking the necessary measures to not take away too much from their farm and not put too much into their farm either. And I'm going to get more into detail about that when we read this text, Local Sustainable. But you can think back to what we read before on industrialized farms about CAFOs, where those cows were crowded together in very cramped spaces and they didn't have room to move. And the fruits and the vegetables had insecticides, pesticides, and harmful chemicals sprayed on them to keep the insects and bugs away from them. Once again, on local sustainable farms, that does not happen. All right, so now what we are going to do is we're going to read this text, and for your classwork and exit ticket, the two sections that you are going to read, where you're going to identify the author's purpose and the author's perspective, is this section, Why Did the Chicken Cross the Pasture? And the Incredible Eggmobile. So this section, Why Did the Chicken Cross the Pasture, starts from right here and it ends right here. And the Incredible Eggmobile starts right here and it ends right here where it says rich and tasty. And I'm going to model with this section the Sanitation Crew, which starts right here and ends right here. And what we're going to focus on is what the author's perspective is. All right. And for your classwork and exit ticket, all right, you're focusing on the author's purpose for writing those sections that I pointed out to you and choosing one piece of evidence from each section to support your answer here. All right. And then lastly, you're going to say what the author's perspective of local sustainable farming is in this section titled Tuesday, which is, Tuesday. The section Tuesday is right here. It starts from right here and ends right here. All right. So now I'm going to read this section and we're going to think of what the author's perspective of local sustainable farming is over here. And we're going to look at specific phrases and words that the author uses to help us determine how the author feels about local sustainable farming. Once the Eggmobile was in position, Joelle opened the trapdoor, and an eager, noisy parade of Barrett Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, and New Hampshire Whites filed down the little ramp, fanning out across the pasture. The hens picked at the grasses, but mainly they were all over the cow pats. They performed a crazy kind of dance with their claws to scratch apart the caked manure and expose the meaty grubs within. I'm convinced an Eggmobile would be worth it, even if the chickens never laid a single egg, Joelle told me. Because of the chickens, Joelle doesn't have to treat his cattle with toxic chemicals to get rid of parasites. This is what Joelle means when he says the animals do the real work on his farm. I'm just the orchestra conductor, making sure everybody's in the right place at the right time. Eggs bring in more money than anything else Joelle sells. To take advantage of that, most farmers would buy more chickens to lay more eggs. But Joelle knows if he added a lot more chickens to the farm, it would throw the system off balance. Too much chicken manure could kill the grass. Suddenly, the manure would become a waste product. Plus, where would the new chickens get larvae for their protein? Joelle would have to buy more cows. But how could he grow enough grass to feed them? It's all connected, he told me. This farm is more like an organism than a machine. And like any organism, it has its proper scale. A mouse is the size of a mouse for a good reason. And a mouse that was the size of an elephant wouldn't do very well. Okay, so there are plenty of words and phrases that we could specifically point to here to help us determine what the author's perspective on local sustainable farming is. But from everything that we've read so far, it is very clear that Michael Pollan believes that local sustainable farming is the way to go. All right. Everything is done naturally there, and we can look to some of these examples. For instance, um, let's look at here. Because of the chickens, Joel doesn't have to treat his cattle with toxic chemicals to get rid of parasites. And when we think of these toxic chemicals, this is something that is used of in industrial farming, right? He believes that by keeping everything balanced on this farm, that he does not need to do anything that goes against nature, right? Um, so on top of that, on he talks about how cows get to eat grass in local sustainable farms rather than being fed corn. All right. Let's look at this sentence right here. It's all connected, he told me. This farm is more like an organism than a machine. And like any organism, it has its proper skill. So, what he's basically saying here is that this farm is treated more like a human being rather than an industry where everything is about mass production, right? And he makes sure that his farm has the right amount of cows, the right amount of chickens, because he knows that by adding too much of anything or by taking away anything, the balance will all be thrown off, right? For example, he knows that by buying more cows, he might not have enough grass to feed all the cows, right? He also knows that by adding too many chickens, um, all that chicken manure would kill the grass, right? Or the toxins would be released and manure would become a waste product, and that would affect the animals and it would affect the food that we eat as well, right? So he believes that a farm needs to sustain its balance, hence the name local sustainable, right? And that is how everything is kept natural and healthy. So if we're looking for evidence of how we know that the author feels that local sustainable farming is the best way of farming, we could look at this quote right here. This farm is more like an organism than a machine. And like any organism, it has its proper scale, right? A human being, right, or a living thing is what an organism is. And that's what he compares his farm to, right? Something that needs to be treated the right way rather than a machine where everything is just produced by a machine in large numbers, right? And that's kind of more like on CAFOs, right? Where they have ridiculous amounts of cows all in one small, tiny space, right? And the manure, they get hoof deep in that manure, right? So then another piece of evidence that we could look at is because of the chickens, Joel doesn't have to treat his cattle with toxic chemicals to get rid of his parasites. So basically, this shows the difference between industrial farming and local sustainable parasites. So he doesn't have to worry about using pesticides and insecticides in local sustainable farms. He simply lets his animals do the work. As long as he keeps everything in balance, the animals will do the work. And he doesn't have to do anything that's going to ruin nature or jeopardize our health in any type of way, right? The chickens themselves will eat the larvae or the insects. So in that sense, he doesn't have to worry about using pesticides and insecticides. Now, obviously, with the way farming is done in local sustainable farming, they won't be able to produce such mass production on the level that takes place in industrial farming is simply not possible, obviously. But you can guarantee that everything will be fresh, natural, and healthy. All right. So he clearly has a positive attitude towards local sustainable farming based on what we have just read, right? So we just determined the author's perspective. we located 2 pieces of evidence, right? Now, once again, for your classwork, where is it? You're going to determine the author's purpose for writing those 2 sections, right? I showed you where they were in the text. 1 piece of evidence for each section that shows what the author's purpose is. And then you're going to say what the author's perspective of local sustainable farming is in that section, and explain how you know while providing 1 piece of evidence. All right. I hope all this was helpful. Lastly, remember that you have to read chapter 16 over the weekend or anytime between now and Monday. On Monday, you will not have a quiz. Your homework is based on chapter 16, and you will find that in assessments as well. And that is all for today.